All science is either physics or stamp collecting. That ring any bells? It's a famous quote attributed to Ernest Rutherford, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century. So great he has an element named after him, and who strangely enough won his Nobel Prize in chemistry for his work on radioactive decay. Nobody was more surprised at this than Rutherford himself, who later wrote, "I must confess it was very unexpected, and I am very startled at my metamorphosis into a chemist." The lesson here is, of course, that the boundaries between the sciences are all ideological constructs. Each brand of science may have its own way of doing things, its own laws and models, even its own culture among its respective scientists, but they are all part of the same thing, ultimately a mindset for investigating the world around us, which is why we often get interdisciplinary fields popping up such as geobiology and biophysics. For a complete view of the universe, you need interdisciplinary thinking. So why do we feel the urge to divide and classify? And was Rutherford correct? Is physics really so different from all the other sciences? Are the other sciences really akin to stamp collecting? And if so, what does that really tell us about them? In answering this, we will also end up talking about science's closest analogue to stamp collecting, natural history. And so also answer the question, what really is natural history? This will make a good intro video for my YouTube channel, which is supposed to be all about natural history. Pretty helpful if I tell you what it is then, isn't it? I used to collect postage stamps when I was a kid. It was my dad who introduced me to philately, as it's called. You keep them in rows in display books and you can group them by decade, by colour, by subject matter or even by rarity. My dad would order us a package full of hundreds of stamps from around the world, then I'd spend lazy afternoons sorting them all into my own classification. Or he'd just buy rarer ones from Stanley Gibbons. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, look at me. Then, when I'd done my organising, I'd sit back and admire my handiwork. There was a certain pleasure to creating this order from chaos. Since then, I've built up many other collections. Rocks and minerals, the crystal forms of chemistry. Fossils, the preserved imprints of beasts from the past. Insects, whether pinned or forever trapped in resin. Even modern aeroplanes, because state-of-the-art technology is always cool. YouTube videos? Does that count? I'm counting it. Subscribe please. That's to name just a few collections. And I reckon most of you will understand where I'm coming from. After all, how else can you explain the popularity of Pokemon, of trading card games, of other generic children's toys? I can't answer why I enjoy collecting things, or why I derive pleasure from imposing order and meaning on random objects that I find, but I can tell you that it's strongly associated with my enthusiasm for science, because when you have a collection of things, you then can't help ask questions like, how are these things related? What makes them different from one another? Why do they have particular similarities? And that is how humans started doing natural history, by going out into the world and collecting things, then asking questions about them. That's what Aristotle was doing when he published his History of Animals in the 4th century BC. That's what Pliny the Elder was doing when he wrote his Natural History, which is unfortunately his only work to have survived after he perished in the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. To these ancient pioneers of science, the term natural history covered fields as diverse as astronomy, geography, humans and their use of technology, even medicine, as well as animals and plants. Then, hundreds of years later, came the Renaissance. In 16th century Italy, aristocrats and royals began to build up their own private collections of thought-provoking artefacts collected on their travels. These were the Wunderkammer, meaning cabinet of curiosities, and the contents were usually divided into 4 categories. Naturalia, artefacts from nature, various rare creatures with a particular interest in monsters, like 2-headed dogs. Artificialia, artificial objects created or modified by humans, like antiques and works of art. Exotica, exotic objects, typically plants or animals collected from distant places. And Scientifica, the testaments of man's ability to dominate nature, such as astrolabes, clocks and scientific instruments. The Wunderkammer was a scholar's microcosm, a universe in a box, or to give it a more modern name, a database. Now science could really get going. Natural history soon filtered down to the general public as a popular pastime. Priests were particularly interested in natural history collecting, as they viewed it as an extension of their study of God. These were the Parson naturalists, whose members included William Turner, the father of English botany. Soon, those with the largest private collections wanted to use them to inspire and educate the masses. In 1863, a private collection of natural history curiosities was donated to the University of Oxford, where the collection was open to the public. The Ashmolean Museum thus became the first permanent public exhibition housed by a corporation. The idea of the museum was born. In the next century, many more would be founded, and none more famous than the Natural History Museum in London. It started out life as the private collection of the physician Sir Hans Sloane, who was curiously enough also credited with the invention of drinking hot chocolate with milk. After he passed away in 1753, the government bought his collection at a bargain price thanks to his generous will, and promptly established the British Museum. In 1856, Sir Richard Owen, a gifted paleontologist and comparative anatomist, now most famous for coining the term dinosauria, took charge of the museum's natural history collection. By all accounts, he was an angry man, and, true to form, quickly became angry at the collection's poor housing. He therefore commissioned the cathedral-like building in South Kensington that still houses the collections today. It only officially split apart from the British Museum in 1963, when it was renamed the Natural History Museum. As the scientific revolution continued, scholars soon developed their own special interests. Physics and chemistry were lumped under the term natural philosophy, a term that had previously been synonymous with all science. This left natural history with the fields of biology and geology, which is why that's what's on display at London's Natural History Museum. But I'll bet you didn't visit for the rocks. And that's because these days, the term natural history, although it can be hard to pin down, generally now refers to an observational way of studying the life sciences. In other words, natural history is going out into the world and watching organisms in their natural environment. More generally, it is the search for patterns in nature and the description and classification of those patterns. In the same vein, you could say it's the story of nature, hence the term history. One who practices natural history is said to be a naturalist, and the greatest naturalist was of course Charles Darwin, who contributed more to the story of nature than anyone else, the theory of evolution. This is the closest thing biology has to a theory of everything. So going back to the original question, stamp collecting is actually very important. It is the gathering of data, without which everything is guesswork. You then have to interpret the data and use it to create useful models for thinking about the world, which can then be tested by collecting more data. Creating models is not just a physics thing. You have to do it in chemistry, and you have to do it in biology. In this way, all sciences can generate new knowledge, so physics is not a special case. Actually, there's even lots of types of scientific models: analogical, idealised, scale and more. I won't go into detail here, but one of the simplest ways to generate new knowledge is just to organise the data, to describe it. Yes, more stamp collecting. Possibly the greatest example of stamp collecting ever was the creation of the periodic table in 1869. Through organising the chemical elements into his famous table, Dmitri Mendeleev showed us a beautifully elegant way to visualise the similarities between the elements in terms of their structures and properties. It was like someone had thrown open the curtains to let the light flood in. Physicists soon enough made their own. The standard model of physics has a similar table for grouping the fundamental particles that make up those chemical elements and everything else in the universe. Yep, physicists secretly love stamp collecting too, but don't mention dark matter. In summary, collecting is something we start doing from an early age. Indeed, this kind of curiosity seems to be an irrepressible part of human nature. And from collecting springs science. And from science springs medicine, technology, progress, the modern world. So don't take the piss out of stamp collecting. Thanks for watching. If you like this, you should probably subscribe because there's a lot more of it.